A final thought on this question of your alliances and lessons to be learned. Kevin Rudd, who of course comprehensively beat you in 07, Kevin Rudd said that one lesson to be learned was that our alliance with the United States does not mandate automatic compliance with every element of US foreign policy. And many Australians, and you can see it in the polls in 07, appeared ultimately to agree with him.
Well, two comments on that. Firstly, I didn't lose in 07 because of the alliance with the United States. That had very little impact on the outcome. There were other reasons. The length of time, the years time factor. I mean, in the modern world, being in office for almost 12 years is an eternity.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to ascribe it to one particular reason, but I want to get to this lesson learned. I mean, you were a great loyalist to Bush. You know, he described you as a friendship...
Well, I'm coming to that, and it's the second. The second response is that we disagreed with Bush on things where we thought he was wrong. I mean, for example, Australia had a different attitude to the International Criminal Court than the Americans. The Americans advocated that we stay right back from that, and we, after a lot of debate, said no, we think we should be part of that process. We frequently disagreed with the Americans on issues relating to trade. We had a different attitude towards China. We were rather more optimistic and upbeat about the contribution that an emerging China could make to the world. The Americans tended to be more nervous about China. There was always an ambivalence in the American response.
Kyoto. Like George Bush, you absolutely refused.
For different reasons.
Well, but you absolutely refused to sign up to Kyoto. Your legacy was to make Australia, partly because of real economic growth that you delivered over many years, make Australia per capita one of the dirtiest developed nations in terms of greenhouse gas emissions in the world.
Yes, but
that's a hell of a legacy.
Neither John Howard nor Kevin Rudd has made that. That's Providence. We are a small country population-wise with huge natural resources by definition. We're going to have high...
You had a choice to make.
No. Well, the choice you have...
Business and industry in Australia that they had to begin to work on doing things differently, and part of that would have been signing up to Kyoto, and you refused to do it. Rudd, of course, has completely changed that. The first thing he did was sign up to Kyoto.
It doesn't matter now if you sign Kyoto, because it's running out in a couple of years' time.
There's a symbolic commitment.
The commitment phase under Kyoto terminates in the year 2012, and the point I was making earlier was that if Providence gives you huge reserves of coal and iron ore and all of these things in a small population, no matter who the Prime Minister is, whether he's Liberal or Labor, Rudd or Howard, you're going to have high per capita admissions unless you say to the Australian people, we are not going to use these God-given resources. Now, no Australian Prime Minister has done that. No Australian Prime Minister will do that.
Let's talk about another aspect of Australia's international reputation and standing under your watch, and that is the way in which you were seen to respect, or perhaps in some cases not respect, international conventions and human rights standards, particularly when it came to dealing with refugees. A 2002 UN report found that detention conditions in one of your most infamous detention centres, quote, offended basic human dignity. Amnesty International, they found that prolonged mandatory detention for unspecified time without judicial review is unquestionably, in their view, a human rights violation.
I'm aware of those.
That was a stain, wasn't it?
Yeah,
on your reputation.
Can I start? Well, it's a stain if you uncritically accept every judgment made by a United Nations committee and every judgment made by Amnesty, and I don't. I don't belong to that school of thought that says every single thing the United Nations says or does by definition has to be right. I mean, the United Nations has been guilty by its neglect because of its structures of some appalling situations in the last 10 or 15 years. For example, what happened in the Balkans in the 1990s, what happened in Rwanda. So whilst I greatly respect many of the agencies of the United Nations, I don't think we should uncritically accept everything that a United Nations committee says. But can I just say on the question of asylum seekers, which you're obviously referring to, one of the outcomes of my policy in relation to that was that we ended up seeing in Australia increased public support for a high migration program and also for the maintenance of an orderly humanitarian refugee program. And on a per capita basis, under my government, it's continued under the present government, Australia takes a larger number of humanitarian refugees, refugees through the humanitarian programs of the UN than most other countries.
Well, we can talk about that, and we will, but there's a message...
But isn't it relevant? I mean, you're making a judgment about the sensitivity of my government and my country towards refugees, so I think you do have to talk about it.
Of course you do, and you're talking about particular programs, and I'm talking about symbolic moments and incidents, which maybe say something about your
Well, it's symbolic
attitude.
if you...
Well, let me just go into the detail.
But it is only symbolic if you believe uncritically every word said by every United Nations committee.
Let's explore one, and then you can explain to me what you were thinking. In 2001, this... vessel, the Tampa, which a Norwegian vessel, which had picked up 400 or so Afghan refugees who were trying to get to Australia. They were in terrible condition. Several of them were unconscious. There was one with a broken leg. There were 3 women who were pregnant. There were almost 50 children on board. The captain of the vessel said these people are in dire condition. You would not let them enter Australian territorial waters. There was a standoff for days. The conditions were getting worse. You, as Prime Minister of Australia, refuse to act with any compassion whatsoever. Why?
Well, I reject that, and I'll tell you what happened and correct some of the things you've said. To start with, they were picked up by the Tampa in the Indonesian search and rescue zone. And the
they were heading for Australia.
No, I'm sorry. They were picked up in the Indonesian search and rescue zone, and the captain was going to take them to Indonesia, and then the people he picked up forced him to turn around and head towards Australia. The remarks that you've made about the health conditions of those on board are different from the information that we had. We were told by military doctors at the time that there were no, when the SAS boarded, that there were no serious medical emergencies, and we indicated at the time that if there were, we would take those medical emergencies to the mainland of Australia to be treated.
The Norwegian government said you ducked to your responsibilities under international law.
With respect, the Norwegian government in making that claim was wrong. Under international law, that vessel should have, the Tampa under international law, because they were picked up in the Indonesian search and rescue zone, should have taken them to Indonesia. That was his original intention. And then it was very clear that the people he picked up, in effect, forced him to head to Australia.
Well, that's not what the Norwegians said, and you know it. And also, you seem to be denying that these people...
I think I was uniquely placed to know what was happening.
What I'm trying to get to is this.
I would have thought you should be getting to the facts.
I'm trying to get to John Howard, the human being.
No.
Because you are faced with a very difficult situation. Nobody would say it's easy, but you've got to decide what to do with people potentially dying on board this vessel.
See, that allegation is wrong. I mean, what you just said is wrong.
Why is that?
Because it wasn't the case.
According to the people on board, it was the case. And these people, when they finally got to a remote Pacific island, which was the deal that was eventually done, they were in desperate shape.
Well, I tell you what, they were picked up in an Indonesian search and rescue zone, and they forced the captain to try and bring them to Australia, and they were taken to Nauru. The medical attention that they received in Nauru was superior to the medical attention they could have received in many other parts of the region. But nothing can alter the fact that the description you gave was inaccurate.
See, there are people, and you know it, people in Australia and around the world who remember comments that you made going back to the late 1980s when you said that to support quote-unquote social cohesion in Australia, the rate of Asian immigration should be slowed down. People remember that, see how you responded to particular events like the Tampa, and they believe that you brought, and they use the word, a racist view to the way you conducted immigration and asylum policy in Australia.
Yeah, well, look, of course there were some people who use language like that about me. I accept that. And people use language about any leader.
We talk a lot about regrets. Do you regret saying that?
Well, I mean, way back in the 1980s, I used some clumsy language in relation to Asian immigration, and I've acknowledged that on a number of occasions.
Clumsy language?
Yes, I did.